She tapped the wall because she heard it breathing, and that is not a metaphor because behind 500 years of solid stone a painting had been waiting to be found, and she was the only nun who was ever supposed to find it. And if you are new here, welcome to The Secret Nun. Subscribe right now because stories like this disappear if you don't save the place that tells them, and this one will change what you think you know about lost art, about faith, about what walls really hide. So that tap happened because a leak had started in the winter of 2018 inside a tiny monastery high in the hills of Tuscany where Sister Lucia had lived for 19 years, and she had never thought of herself as someone who finds anything important because her life was quiet and practical, and she fixed what was broken and she cleaned what was dirty, and she prayed in the early mornings when the stone was still cold, and that leak mattered because water was staining the plaster in the north corridor right beside the old chapel where no one went anymore except to store broken chairs and extra candles, and she noticed it because she walked that corridor every single day at 6 a.m. to ring the bell, and every day the stain got a little darker and a little wider, which made her worry because water destroys old buildings from the inside out, and she loved that building like it was a living thing. And so she went to Mother Superior and said the wall needs to be opened before the winter gets worse. And Mother Superior hesitated because that particular wall had not been touched in anyone's living memory, and there was an old rule, not written anywhere official but repeated from one abbess to the next, that said never open the north wall unless the building itself forces you to, and that hesitation made Lucia curious because rules that old always have a reason even if no one remembers it anymore, and so when the stonemason finally came 3 days later and tapped that wall with his hammer, the sound that came back was wrong because solid stone does not sound hollow, and this wall sounded completely hollow for a space nearly 6 feet wide, and that hollow sound made everyone in that hallway go silent because they all felt it at the same time that they were not just looking at a wall anymore, they were looking at something hidden, and that feeling got stronger because when the mason chipped away the first layer of plaster a line appeared, a perfectly straight vertical line that no natural crack ever makes, and then another line appeared horizontal to it. And then the outline of a rectangle became visible under the dust, which meant someone had built a false wall in front of a real wall a very long time ago and had plastered over it so carefully that 5 centuries of nuns had walked past it every day without ever knowing. And Lucia's hand started shaking, not from fear but from the weight of that realization, because she understood in that moment that the leak had not caused a problem, it had revealed a secret. And so the mason kept working because now he had to. And he removed the stones one by one, and every stone he pulled out made the air in the hallway feel colder and older. And behind the second layer of stone there was not insulation or rubble or empty space but a thick slab of dark wood sealed with wax that had turned almost black with age, and that wax seal was stamped with a symbol that none of them recognized, a compass and a mirrored letter L intertwined, which meant this was not just a hidden room, this was a deliberate sealing by someone who knew how to make something disappear on purpose. And that wax had to be broken because there was no other way forward, and when Lucia touched it she felt how hard and brittle it was, which told her it had not been touched in hundreds of years, and so she broke it with the mason's chisel, and the wood behind it moved for the first time in 500 years, and that movement released a puff of dry, cold air that smelled like old paper and stone dust and linseed oil, which is a smell painters know immediately, and behind that wood was a shallow chamber no deeper than a closet but built with the precision of a vault. And inside that chamber there was a single object wrapped in oiled cloth and then in lead sheeting and then in more oiled cloth, as if someone had been terrified of humidity, of time, of anything that could destroy what was inside. And Lucia lifted it out because her hands were the smallest and steadiest, and it was heavier than she expected, which made her even more careful, and she carried it into the chapel and laid it on the altar table because that was the only flat clean surface big enough. And she started unwrapping it layer by layer, and every layer made her heart beat faster because she could feel that this was not a relic or a box of documents or coins, this was flat and framed. And when the last cloth fell away she stopped breathing because she was looking at a painting, and not just any painting. The colors were still vivid in a way that made no sense for something so old. The face was a woman's face turned 3/4 to the left with eyes that followed you. The background was a Tuscan landscape with a river that faded into blue mountains. The technique was sfumato, that soft smoky blending that only one man in history truly mastered, and on the back of the wooden panel there were faint handwritten notes in Old Italian and one clear signature that made the mason whisper a name he had only ever heard in museums, Leonardo, and that name hung in the cold chapel air. And changed everything, because if this was what they thought it was, then this forgotten monastery in the hills had been hiding a lost Leonardo da Vinci for 500 years behind a wall that was never supposed to be opened. And Lucia did not want to believe it right away because wanting to believe something so huge makes you vulnerable to being wrong, and so she did what a careful person does: she protected it, she covered it again, she locked the chapel, she called Mother Superior, and Mother Superior called the diocese, and the diocese called someone who called someone else, and within 48 hours 2 art historians arrived from Florence who had spent their entire lives studying Leonardo, and they did not smile when they came in. They looked serious and a little afraid, and they asked for gloves and a magnifying glass and natural light, and they unwrapped the painting again, and they did not speak for a very long time, which made Lucia more nervous than any words could have, and then one of them started crying without making any sound because she recognized the brushwork, the way the light was built up in thin transparent layers, the way the eyes were constructed with tiny red veins, the way the hands were drawn with anatomical perfection that only Leonardo could do because he dissected 30 human hands just to understand them, and the other historian kept saying sotto voce, "Impossible, impossible," because this painting did not exist in any catalogue, in any record, in any history book, yet here it was. And they turned it over and looked at the notes on the back, and one line was dated 1519 in faded ink and it said per protection, for protection, and another line said Illinois Muro Nord, the North Wall, and that proved this hiding was intentional, and it was done right after Leonardo's death when his assistant Francesco Melzi was trying to protect his master's unfinished and private works from being seized by powerful men who wanted to own or destroy anything they could not control. And that history matters because after Leonardo died in France his studio was scattered, his notebooks were divided, many paintings were taken by the French court, some were left unfinished, and a small number simply vanished with no record of where they went, and historians have always believed there were works that were deliberately hidden by people who loved him because they understood that genius is not always safe in the hands of the powerful, and that belief became real in this chapel because the evidence on the wall itself showed that the north corridor had been renovated. In 1521, according to a faint inscription Lucia later found carved into the stone behind where the wood had been, and that date lines up perfectly with Melzi's movements through Tuscany in that exact year when he was carrying several of Leonardo's private panels back toward Milan, and so the painting was not lost by accident, it was hidden on purpose by someone who chose a monastery because monasteries were the only places in 16th century Italy that were never searched, never burned, never looted without consequence, because even armies feared the spiritual punishment of violating a convent, and that choice worked because for 500 years wars passed through that valley, Napoleon's troops marched nearby, World War II bombers flew overhead, earthquakes shook the hills, and still that wall held. And that is why the leak matters so much, because it was the first time water had ever found that exact seam, and water found it because the climate had changed just enough to push rain at a different angle against that specific corner, which means if Lucia had ignored that stain for even one more season the water would have reached the wood and the lead and the cloth and would have started to destroy the painting from behind without anyone ever knowing it was there. So her habit of noticing small things saved something the whole world thought was gone forever. And that is where the story gets even more emotional because the historians did not take the painting away right away, they left it in the chapel for 3 more days under guard while they brought in a portable lab, and during those 3 days Lucia sat with it, and she talked to it, not because she thought it could hear her but because she felt the weight of the person who had hidden it, and she imagined Francesco Melzi on a cold night in 1521, tired, afraid, carrying this panel wrapped in cloth on a mule, arriving at this small monastery and begging the abbess to build a wall and to never tell anyone. And she imagined that abbess saying yes without understanding what she was protecting, only knowing that someone she trusted was asking her to keep a secret for longer than her own lifetime, and Lucia understood that feeling because she had just become that abbess. And so she prayed not for fame or for money but for wisdom about what to do next, because once the world knows a Leonardo has been found everything changes, and it did, because on the 4th day the results came back from the pigment analysis and the wood dating and the infrared reflectography, and the poplar panel was cut between 1505 and 1510, which is exactly when Leonardo was in Florence working on private portraits. The pigments were lead white and lapis lazuli and vermilion ground exactly the way Leonardo ground them. The underdrawing showed left-handed hatching strokes, which is one of the most personal signatures an artist can leave because Leonardo was famously left-handed and he hatched from left to right in a way no right-handed copyist ever naturally does, and the infrared revealed a pentimento, a change of mind, where the position of the woman's left hand had been moved slightly during painting, which proves this was not a copy painted after the fact but an original created through the messy, human process of searching for the right form, and when the head historian read those results out loud in the chapel, Lucia started to cry because she finally allowed herself to believe it, and Mother Superior put her hand on her shoulder and said, "This is bigger than us now," and she was right, because within a week the Italian Ministry of Culture arrived, and then the Vatican sent an observer, and then security was placed at the monastery gates, and Lucia's quiet life became suddenly not quiet at all, and she struggled with that because she had not found this painting for attention. She had found it because she was doing her job and paying attention to a stain on a wall, and she worried that the monastery's silence, which had protected the painting for 500 years, would now be lost forever under cameras and crowds, and that worry was valid because the story leaked to the press before anyone was ready, and the headline was everywhere: "Lost Leonardo found behind monastery wall after 500 years, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about who owned it, whether the monastery could keep it, whether it should go to the Uffizi or the Louvre, whether it was really worth 100 million or 300 million, and all that noise felt so far from the quiet chapel where she had first unwrapped it. And so the ministry made a beautiful decision that honored both history and faith. They declared the painting a national treasure, but they allowed it to remain the legal property of the monastery with the condition that it be conserved and displayed in a way that the public could see it without destroying the contemplative life of the sisters, and they built a small climate-controlled chapel museum attached to the north corridor, exactly where the wall had been, with bulletproof glass and perfect humidity, and they placed the painting there where light hits it the way Leonardo intended, soft and from the left, and they put a small plaque next to it that does not say Leonardo da Vinci in big letters. It says "Hidden for Protection 1521 to 2018, found by Sister Lucia," and that matters because it remembers not just the genius who made it but the ordinary people who saved it by keeping a secret longer than any of them lived, and if you go there today you can still see the original false wall stones preserved behind glass as part of the exhibit, and you can see the water stain on the plaster that started it all because they left it there on purpose. And Lucia still rings the bell at 6 a.m. every morning, and she still walks past that corridor, but now she walks past glass and light and the face of a woman who has looked out from behind stone for 500 years waiting for someone careful enough to notice. And when people ask Lucia what it felt like to find a Leonardo, she always says the same thing. She says, "I did not find a masterpiece, I found a promise that was kept, because someone in 1521 promised an old master that his work would survive, and a line of nuns who never knew what they were protecting kept that promise without ever needing to know, and a leak kept it too by arriving at exactly the right moment, and I just happened to be the one who was listening," and that answer tells you everything about why this story is not really about a painting worth hundreds of millions. It is about the quiet power of paying attention, of doing small jobs with great care, of believing that walls can hold more than stone, and that is why this story stayed with me and why I knew I had to tell it to you today here on The Secret Nun. Because there are still walls around us that are waiting to be heard, still stains we walk past without asking what they mean, still secrets that survive only because someone chooses to be faithful in a small, hidden task that no one applauds. And if this story made you feel something real, if it made you see your own hallway walls a little differently, I want you to do two things right now that will help this story keep traveling. First, tell me in the comments honestly, if you had been Lucia and you had heard that hollow sound, would you have opened the wall immediately that same day, or would you have waited and called more experts and risked the water doing more damage while you waited? I read every single comment and I want to know what you would have done, because your answer says a lot about how you handle the mysteries in your own life. And second, share this video with someone who loves lost history, who loves art, who loves the idea that a humble nun in a forgotten monastery can change art history forever just by noticing a leak. Because stories like this do not spread by algorithms alone. They spread because one person who was moved decides to pass it on to another person who needs to hear it. And if you have not yet subscribed to The Secret Nun, do it right now and turn on the bell so you never miss the next hidden story that has been waiting centuries to be told. Your subscription is what tells YouTube to keep showing these quiet, powerful histories to people who will cherish them, and I promise you the next story I have found for you is even more unbelievable than this one. So stay with me, keep your eyes open, and remember, sometimes the greatest masterpieces are not lost at all, they are just waiting behind the wall you walk past every single day for someone who finally stops, listens, and dares to tap.